Zefkari floated in his biopod, reading the assignment document for the third time. The warm green liquid that surrounded his thin body helped him think better, but today, even the comfort of his natural environment could not calm his excitement. After 200 years of studying peaceful species across the galaxy, the Galactic Observation Council had finally given him something different to observe. The humans were new to the galactic community. They had discovered faster than light, travel only 50 years ago, and had been building colonies in nearby star systems ever since. Most species took thousands of years to reach this level of technology, but humans seemed to learn and grow at an unusual speed. This fact alone made them interesting to study. The document in Zefkari's webbed hands explained the current situation. The hegemony, a powerful empire ruled by large reptilian beings, had declared war on the human colonies in the Proxima sector. The hegemony controlled over 200 star systems and had never lost a war against a younger species. Their military was known throughout the galaxy for its discipline, advanced weapons, and overwhelming force. The humans had only 12 star systems under their control. Their technology was basic compared to most galactic civilizations. Their ships were built with simple metals and used primitive energy sources. Most council members expected the war to last no more than a few weeks before the humans either surrendered or were completely destroyed. Zefkari belonged to the Etherian species, a race of tall, thin beings who had evolved from peaceful sea creatures on a water world. His people had given up warfare over 10,000 years ago, choosing instead to focus on science, art, and philosophy. Violence was so foreign to Etherian culture that they had to study other species to understand why conflicts happened at all. The A Council had chosen Zefkari for this mission because of his reputation for careful, unbiased observation. He had written detailed reports on over 50 different species, always focusing on facts rather than emotions. His studies had helped the Council understand how different cultures developed and how they might fit into the larger galactic community. The assignment seemed straightforward. Zefkari would take his small, cloaked observation ship to the area where the first battle was expected to happen. He would record everything he saw and heard, then return to write a complete report on human military behavior. The Council was particularly interested in how humans would react when faced with certain defeat. Zefkari prepared his ship for the journey. The vessel was designed for long-term observation missions, with advanced sensors that could detect everything from energy weapons to biological signatures. The cloaking system would make him invisible to both human and hegemony forces, allowing him to observe without interfering in the conflict. As his ship traveled through hyperspace toward the Proxima sector, Zefkari reviewed what little was known about human culture. Humans seemed to be emotional creatures who formed strong bonds with their family groups. They had a complex social structure and showed unusual creativity in solving problems. Most interesting of all, they appeared to have a strong sense of what they called honor, though the Council was not sure what this concept meant in practical terms. The journey took 3 standard days. When Zefkari's ship dropped out of hyperspace near the New Horizons system, he immediately began scanning for military activity. His sensors detected the human colony on the 3rd planet, home to nearly 2 million people. The planet had basic, defensive systems, but nothing that could stop a serious military attack. Zefkari positioned his ship in the asteroid belt surrounding the system, where the rocks would help hide his presence. From this distance, his advanced sensors could observe everything that happened in the area, while keeping him completely safe from any weapons fire. The human fleet arrived first. Zefkari counted 12 ships of various sizes, led by a vessel that his sensors identified as the Earth Defense Ship Liberty. The ships were clearly built for war, with thick armor plating and multiple weapon systems, but they looked crude compared to the sleek designs used by most galactic civilizations. The largest human ship was only half the size of a standard hegemony cruiser. The humans had arranged their fleet in a defensive formation around the planet, but Zefkari could not understand their strategy. With such a small force, they could not hope to protect the entire world from attack. Communication intercepts revealed that the human fleet was commanded by someone called Captain Jake Morrison. The man's voice sounded calm and steady as he gave orders to his ships. But Zefkari detected underlying tension in the way humans spoke to each other. They seemed to understand that they were about to face a much stronger enemy. The hegemony fleet appeared 6 hours later. 37 ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls gleaming with energy shields and weapon systems. Each ship was larger and more powerful than anything in the human fleet. The hegemony formation looked like a moving wall of metal and energy, advancing slowly toward the planet. Zefkari activated all of his recording systems. This would be his first chance to observe actual space combat, and he wanted to capture every detail. Based on his studies of other young species, he expected the humans to either flee immediately or attempt to negotiate some kind of surrender. Instead, the humans did something that surprised him. They began broadcasting messages on all communication frequencies, not to the hegemony fleet but to the planet below. The messages told the civilians to evacuate to underground shelters and to prepare for possible invasion. The humans were not planning to run or surrender. They were planning to fight. Captain Morrison's voice came across the communication channels one final time before the battle began. He spoke to his fleet with words that Zefkari would remember for the rest of his long life. The human captain told his people that they were outnumbered and outgunned, but that their job was simple. They had to hold the enemy fleet as long as possible while the civilians escaped. Zefkari adjusted his sensors for maximum detail and began recording. He had expected to document a quick defeat that would serve as a lesson about the dangers of challenging established powers. Instead, he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of warfare forever. The first weapons fire lit up space like deadly fireworks. Zefkari watched through his sensors as the hegemony fleet opened the battle with a coordinated barrage that should have destroyed half the human ships instantly. The energy beams and plasma missiles streaked across the darkness between the two fleets, creating a light show that was both beautiful and terrifying. The human ships scattered in all directions, breaking their neat formation and moving in patterns that seemed random and chaotic. Zefkari had studied dozens of military engagements, and he had never seen a fleet abandon formation so quickly. Most species maintained strict battle lines and fought according to established tactical doctrines that had been developed over thousands of years. But the humans were not following any doctrine that Zefkari recognized. Their ships moved like individual hunters rather than a coordinated military force. Some ships charged directly at the enemy, while others circled around the flanks. A few human vessels simply disappeared from his sensors, apparently using some kind of stealth technology to hide their positions. The hegemony commanders seemed as confused as Zefkari. Their perfect formation began to spread out as they tried to target the fast-moving human ships. The reptilian species had built their military around overwhelming firepower and superior technology, but their weapons were designed to destroy large, slow-moving targets that fought in predictable patterns. Captain Morrison's ship, the Liberty, led a group of 5 vessels in what appeared to be a suicide charge directly toward the center of the hegemony line. The human ships took heavy damage as they closed the distance, their armor glowing red-hot from energy weapon impacts. Zefkari expected them to pull back or explode under the concentrated fire. Instead, something happened that made Zefkari question his own sensors. One of the human ships, a vessel identified as the Defender, was obviously dying. Half of its weapons were destroyed, its engines were failing, and atmosphere was venting from multiple hull breaches. Any civilized species would have surrendered or retreated to save the lives of the crew. Lieutenant Commander Amy Parker, the captain of the Defender, did neither. Instead, she ordered her dying ship to ram directly into the nearest hegemony cruiser. The impact destroyed both vessels instantly, creating an explosion that damaged several other enemy ships nearby. Zefkari stared at his recordings in shock. The human had deliberately killed herself and her entire crew to destroy one enemy ship. This was not tactics or strategy. This was something beyond his understanding, something that his peaceful species had never encountered in all their years of studying galactic warfare. The battle continued for 3 more hours, and every minute brought new examples of human behavior that defied military logic. Commander Steve Chen's ship, the Guardian, continued fighting even after its weapon systems were destroyed and half the crew was dead. Chen used his ship as a battering ram, striking enemy vessels and using the Guardian's hull as a weapon until the ship finally exploded from accumulated damage. When human ships ran out of ammunition, they did not retreat to rearm. Instead, they moved closer to enemy vessels and used their remaining power to overload their own reactors, creating improvised bombs that could damage nearby ships. When their engines failed, human crews continued to fight using emergency thrusters and whatever weapons still functioned. The most disturbing thing for Zefkari was how the humans communicated during the battle. Instead of tactical information or requests for assistance, they spent their final moments sending personal messages to their families and encouraging their fellow warriors to continue fighting. They spoke about duty, honor, and sacrifice, using words that his translation software could process but that his mind could not truly understand. Captain Morrison's voice remained steady throughout the battle, even as his ship took damage that would have forced any other species to abandon the fight. He continued giving orders and coordinating attacks until the very end, when the Liberty's hull was breached in dozens of places and most of his crew was dead or dying. In his final moments, Morrison did something that Zefkari would never forget. The human captain aimed his burning, crippled ship directly at the Hegemony flagship and engaged his remaining engines at maximum power. The Liberty crashed through the enemy ship's energy shields and into its main hangar bay, where Morrison detonated every explosive device remaining on his vessel. The explosion tore the Hegemony flagship in half and killed thousands of enemy soldiers. Morrison and his crew died instantly, but their sacrifice destroyed the most powerful ship in the enemy fleet and left the Hegemony forces without their primary command vessel. When the battle finally ended, both fleets were badly damaged. The humans had lost 8 of their 12 ships, but they had destroyed 15 Hegemony vessels and damaged many others. More importantly, they had delayed the enemy attack long enough for most of the civilians on the planet below to reach safety in underground shelters. Zefkari reviewed his recordings with growing unease. The humans had technically lost the battle since they had fewer ships remaining, but they had achieved their goal of protecting the civilian population. They had fought with a desperate intensity that seemed to actually unnerve the Hegemony forces, who were used to facing opponents that followed conventional military procedures. The surviving human ships regrouped around the planet and began preparing defensive positions for the expected ground assault. They showed no signs of surrender or retreat, even though they were clearly outmatched. If anything, the humans seemed more determined than ever to continue fighting. The Hegemony fleet pulled back to a safe distance to assess their damage and plan their next move. Zefkari could intercept their communications, and he was surprised by what he heard. The reptilian commanders were arguing among themselves about the unexpected human tactics. Some wanted to press the attack immediately, while others suggested calling for reinforcements before continuing the assault. The Hegemony had expected an easy victory against a primitive species. Instead, they had encountered an enemy that seemed willing to die rather than surrender, and that fought with methods that made their advanced technology less effective. The human willingness to sacrifice their own lives for tactical advantage was something that the Hegemony military had never prepared for. As Zefkari compiled his initial observations, he realized that his mission had become much more complex than originally planned. He had been sent to document a simple defeat, but instead, he was witnessing the emergence of a new type of warfare that challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about military conflict. The humans were clearly primitive in terms of technology and tactics, but they possessed something that more advanced species seemed to have lost. They fought not just with weapons and ships, but with an emotional intensity that turned every battle into a personal struggle for survival. This made them far more dangerous than their small fleet size and basic technology would suggest. News of the battle at New Horizons spread quickly through both human and Hegemony territories. Zefkari monitored the communication networks from his hidden position, watching as both species reacted to the unexpected outcome of their first major engagement. The responses he observed would prove to be even more revealing than the battle itself. The Hegemony High Command was deeply disturbed by their losses. In their 2,000-year military history, they had never lost 15 ships to such a small enemy force. Emergency meetings were called on their capital world, and Zefkari intercepted fragments of heated discussions between their military leaders. The reptilian commanders could not understand how primitive humans had caused such damage to their superior fleet. Some hegemony generals wanted to withdraw from human territory entirely, arguing that the cost of conquest was too high. Others demanded massive reinforcements to crush the humans quickly before their unusual tactics could spread to other young species. The final decision was to continue the war, but with much larger forces and more careful planning. The human response was completely different. Instead of celebrating their survival, human leaders immediately began preparing for the next attack. Zefkari watched as they evacuated more civilian populations, built new defensive positions, and called for volunteers to join their military forces. Most surprising of all, they began studying recordings of the battle to improve their fighting methods. 3 weeks after the space battle, the hegemony launched their ground assault on New Horizons. Zefkari repositioned his ship to observe the planetary invasion, expecting to see conventional warfare between organized armies. What he witnessed instead was unlike anything in his database of military conflicts. General Susan Hayes commanded the human ground forces from a fortified position in the planet's largest city. The humans had only 20,000 soldiers to defend against 50,000 hegemony troops, but they had used their time wisely to prepare the battlefield. Every building had been turned into a fortress, every street had been mined or blocked, and the entire civilian population had been trained to support the military effort. The hegemony forces landed in perfect formations, using advanced hover tanks and energy weapons that should have overwhelmed any primitive defense. Their battle plan was flawless according to standard military doctrine, calling for rapid strikes against key targets followed by systematic occupation of the entire planet. The humans ignored standard military doctrine completely. Instead of meeting the invaders in open battle, they allowed the hegemony forces to advance into the city and then attacked from every direction at once. Human soldiers emerged from sewers, buildings, and hidden bunkers to strike at the enemy. Rear guard. Civilians provided intelligence, medical support, and supplies while staying out of direct combat. Zefkari watched in fascination as the humans demonstrated an ability that he had never seen in any other species. They adapted to changing conditions faster than their enemies could respond. When hegemony energy weapons proved superior to human projectile weapons, the human forces switched to using explosives and improvised devices. When their vehicles were destroyed, they continued fighting on foot. When their ammunition ran low, they captured enemy weapons and used them against their former owners. The battle for the city lasted 6 days. Sergeant Alex Martinez and his squad of 12 soldiers held a critical intersection that controlled access to the main civilian shelter. The position was attacked repeatedly by forces 10 times their size, but the humans refused to retreat even when their situation became hopeless. On the 4th day, Martinez was badly wounded by an energy blast that burned through his chest armor. Any sensible soldier would have withdrawn for medical treatment, but Martinez ordered his squad to fall back while he remained behind to slow the enemy advance. Using the last of his explosives, he blocked the main approach to the intersection and forced the hegemony troops to find another route. When the enemy finally overran his position, Martinez was barely alive, but still fighting with a captured energy rifle. As hegemony soldiers swarmed around him, he pulled the pins on his remaining grenades and held them close to his body. The explosion killed Martinez and 6 enemy soldiers, buying his squad enough time to establish a new defensive position 50 meters away. The hegemony commanders were beginning to understand that they faced an enemy unlike any they had fought before. Every human position had to be taken multiple times because the humans would retake it, using whatever weapons they could find. Wounded humans continued fighting until they physically could not move. Captured humans refused to provide intelligence, and often attempted to escape or attack their guards. Most disturbing of all was the way humans treated their own dead. Instead of simply removing bodies from the battlefield, they used fallen comrades as inspiration to fight even harder. Every human death seemed to increase the determination of the survivors, rather than weakening their resolve. Zefkari documented hundreds of similar incidents during the ground campaign. He watched human soldiers charge machine gun positions with nothing but knives and grenades. He observed civilians risk their lives to rescue wounded fighters and bring them medical supplies. He recorded conversations between human commanders who spoke about duty and sacrifice, as if these concepts were more important than their own survival. The turning point came when the hegemony forces finally reached the main civilian shelter. General Hayes had concentrated her remaining troops around this position, knowing that the enemy would eventually break through all other defenses. The humans were outnumbered 5-1 and had been fighting without rest for nearly a week. The final assault began at dawn on the 7th day. The hegemony attacked with everything they had, determined to end the resistance once and for all. Energy weapons lit up the morning sky as hover tanks advanced through the rubble-filled streets toward the human positions. The humans met this final attack with everything they had learned during 6 days of desperate fighting. They used the destroyed buildings as cover, turning every piece of debris into a weapon or barrier. They attacked from unexpected directions, using tunnels and hidden passages that the enemy had not discovered. Most importantly, they fought with the same desperate intensity that had characterized their resistance from the beginning. When the battle finally ended 12 hours later, both sides had suffered terrible losses. The hegemony had taken the city and captured the civilian shelter, but they had lost over 30,000 troops in the process. Their surviving forces were exhausted, demoralized, and no longer confident in their ability to control human territory. General Hayes was captured during the final assault, but her last radio transmission was broadcast throughout human space. She told her people that the civilians were safe, that the soldiers had done their duty, and that the war was far from over. Her words became a rallying cry for human forces throughout the galaxy. Zefkari realized that he was no longer observing a simple military conflict. The humans were teaching the galaxy a new type of warfare, one based on absolute commitment, rather than superior technology. Every battle was making them stronger and more dangerous, while their enemies grew increasingly uncertain about their ability to achieve victory. The war that was supposed to last a few weeks had already continued for 2 months, and there was no end in sight. More troubling for Zefkari was his growing realization that the humans were not fighting like any civilized species he had studied. They were fighting like something else entirely, something that his peaceful people had never encountered and could barely comprehend. 6 months had passed since the first battle at New Horizons, and Zefkari barely recognized the conflict he was observing. What had begun as a simple war of conquest had transformed into something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. The humans were no longer just fighting for survival. They were winning. The change was most visible in their technology. Captain Lisa Turner commanded the Earth defense ship New Dawn, one of 30 vessels in the human fleet that now patrolled the contested border regions. Zefkari's sensors revealed that these new ships were unlike anything the humans had possessed. At the beginning of the war, the New Dawn and her sister ships represented a fusion of human engineering and captured hegemony technology that created something entirely new. The humans had taken the advanced energy systems and defensive shields from destroyed enemy vessels and combined them with their own innovations in ways that their creators had never intended. But the real change was not in the ships themselves. It was in how the humans used them. Where the hegemony fought with rigid formations and predictable tactics, the human fleet moved like a living thing, constantly shifting and adapting to take advantage of any weakness they discovered. Zefkari positioned his observation ship near Kepler Station to witness what intelligence reports suggested would be a major engagement. The space station controlled access to 3 different star systems and had been heavily fortified by hegemony forces. Any attack on such a well-defended position should have required overwhelming force and careful planning. Commander Ryan Clark led the human assault with only 18 ships against a station defended by 45 vessels and countless fixed weapons. By all logical analysis, the attack should have failed before it began. But Zefkari was learning that logic meant something different when applied to human warfare. The battle began with what appeared to be a straightforward assault. Human ships charged directly at the station's defensive perimeter, taking heavy fire and suffering significant damage. Several vessels were destroyed in the first few minutes, and Zefkari assumed he was witnessing another example of human willingness to sacrifice themselves for minimal tactical gain. Then the deception became clear. The frontal assault had been a diversion, designed to focus hegemony attention on the main attack force while smaller human ships used stealth technology to approach the station from an unexpected direction. But even this was not the real plan. The true objective was revealed when Commander Clark's ship, apparently crippled by enemy fire, drifted helplessly toward the station's main docking bay. The hegemony defenders ignored the damaged vessel, focusing their attention on the more obvious threats approaching from other directions. When the seemingly dead ship reached the docking bay, it suddenly came to life. The New Dawn's weapons were not damaged at all, and Clark's crew had been waiting for exactly this moment. They opened fire at point-blank range, destroying the station's primary shield generator and opening a gap in its defenses that the other human ships immediately exploited. The entire battle had been an elaborate deception, with every human action designed to create a specific response from the enemy. The humans had not just studied hegemony tactics. They had learned to predict and manipulate them, turning their enemies' strengths into weaknesses. But the most disturbing aspect of the engagement was what happened after the station fell. Instead of simply destroying it or claiming it as a prize, the humans did something that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They reprogrammed the station's communication systems to send false orders throughout the hegemony fleet network. Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Ross led the team that infiltrated the station's command center. Ross and his soldiers were not just warriors. They were experts in electronic warfare, computer systems, and psychological manipulation. They used their access to hegemony communications to create chaos throughout the enemy fleet. False orders sent 3 hegemony battle groups to the same location, where they engaged each other in a massive friendly fire incident that destroyed dozens of ships. Other units received contradictory commands that sent them racing across empty space while human forces struck at undefended targets. The confusion lasted for weeks and effectively paralyzed hegemony operations in an entire sector. Zefkari realized that he was witnessing the emergence of a new form of warfare that went far beyond simple violence. The humans were not just fighting their enemies. They were studying them, learning their weaknesses, and developing methods to exploit those weaknesses in ways that caused maximum damage with minimum cost. This was not the behavior of a primitive species learning to fight. This was the behavior of natural predators who had found their prey. The psychological impact on hegemony forces was becoming as important as the physical damage. Zefkari intercepted communications between enemy commanders that revealed growing doubt about their ability to defeat the humans. Morale was declining throughout their military, and some units were beginning to refuse orders to engage human forces directly. The humans seemed to understand this effect and deliberately worked to increase it. They began using propaganda broadcasts that were transmitted on frequencies the hegemony used for military communications. These messages did not threaten or boast. Instead, they simply told the truth about recent battles, letting hegemony soldiers know exactly how many of their comrades had died and how little progress they had made. More disturbing were the human rescue operations. When hegemony ships were disabled but not destroyed, human forces would sometimes board them to provide medical aid to wounded enemy soldiers. They treated their prisoners well and often released them with messages for their commanders about the futility of continued resistance. This combination of ruthless efficiency in battle and unexpected mercy afterward created confusion throughout hegemony ranks. Their soldiers no longer knew what to expect from human forces, and uncertainty was proving to be as effective a weapon as any energy beam or missile. Captain Turner's fleet had grown to include ships captured from the enemy, modified with human technology, and crewed by volunteers from dozens of different human worlds. The humans were not just defending their original colonies anymore. They were expanding, claiming new territories, and building a military force that rivaled the power of the hegemony itself. Zefkari watched a battle near the Proxima Centauri system where human forces demonstrated their latest innovation. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships, they used new weapons designed to disable them temporarily. Once the hegemony vessels were helpless, human boarding parties would capture them intact, along with their crews and technology. Within hours, those same ships would be back in action under human command, their original crews either recruited as allies or safely imprisoned on nearby human worlds. The humans were not just winning battles. They were converting their enemies' resources into their own strength, while simultaneously weakening their opponents. The war had reached a tipping point where the hegemony was no longer confident of victory. Their military leaders were calling for negotiations, something that had never happened in their long history of conquest. But the humans seemed to have no interest in ending the conflict through diplomacy. Zefkari began to understand that the humans were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting to prove a point about their place in the galactic community. Every victory made them stronger and more confident, while every defeat taught them lessons that made them more dangerous in future battles. The observer realized with growing unease that he might be documenting the rise of a new dominant species in the galaxy. The humans had started the war as a primitive civilization defending their few colonies. They were becoming something that could challenge the established order throughout known space. The war entered its second year with an event that would forever change Zefkari's understanding of the species he had been sent to observe. While analyzing human combat patterns and trying to predict their next moves, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his long life. He accessed the human historical database to learn more about their past. What he discovered in those ancient records was more terrifying than any battle he had witnessed. The peaceful species of the galaxy had all evolved from prey animals or plant-eating creatures who had learned to cooperate for mutual protection. They had developed intelligence as a way to avoid conflict and find peaceful solutions to problems. Humans were different. They had evolved from something that the galaxy had never encountered before. They were persistence hunters, pack predators, who had spent millions of years perfecting the art of tracking, cornering, and killing other creatures. War was not something they had learned from other species. War was something they had temporarily forgotten. The historical records showed a planet covered in the remains of countless species that humans had hunted to extinction. They had fought wars against each other for thousands of years, developing weapons and tactics that no peaceful civilization could imagine. Their entire culture was built around concepts like honor, sacrifice, and victory that only made sense to a species that had evolved to kill. Even more disturbing was the realization that the humans Zefkari had been observing were not warriors, returning to their natural state. They were civilians, scientists, and explorers who had been forced to remember skills that their ancestors had used to become the dominant predator on their world. This revelation came just as the hegemony launched, their final desperate assault on the human home system. Unable to defeat human forces in the outer colonies, they had decided to strike directly at Earth itself. If they could destroy or capture the human homeworld, they believed the scattered human colonies would surrender rather than continue fighting alone. Admiral Ben Cooper commanded the defense of Earth from orbital platforms that surrounded the planet like a metal ring. The human fleet had grown significantly during the war, but they still faced overwhelming odds. 300 hegemony ships approached the solar system, determined to end the conflict with one massive blow. Zefkari followed the hegemony fleet to observe what he expected would be the final battle of the war. His sensors detected the human defensive preparations as he entered the outer solar system, and what he saw defied every expectation based on civilized warfare. Earth was not just defended by its military forces. The entire planet had been turned into a fortress. Every space station had been armed with weapons. Every civilian ship had been converted for military use. Every human settlement had become a potential battleground where millions of people were prepared to fight and die rather than surrender. Children as young as 10 years old were operating communication networks and radar systems. Elderly humans who could barely walk were loading ammunition and maintaining weapons. Scientists and teachers had become soldiers, while artists and musicians served as medics and engineers. The defense of Earth was not a military operation. It was the response of an entire species that had decided to fight for its survival, using every resource and every person available. Zefkari realized that he was about to witness something that had never happened in galactic history. He was going to see what occurred when a predator species faced extinction. The battle began in the outer solar system, where human patrol ships met the advancing hegemony fleet near Jupiter. These small vessels could not hope to stop such a massive force, but they were not trying to win. They were buying time and gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities while slowly falling back toward Earth. Admiral Cooper's strategy became clear as the battle progressed. The humans were not going to meet the enemy in one decisive engagement. Instead, they were going to make the hegemony fight for every meter of space between Jupiter and Earth, using the solar system itself as a weapon. Asteroid fields became minefields, where hidden human ships waited to ambush passing enemy vessels. The rings of Saturn were used to hide entire squadrons that struck at hegemony flanks before disappearing again. Even the planets themselves were turned into weapons, with mass drivers launching rocks and debris at enemy ships as they passed nearby. The hegemony fleet found itself fighting not just human ships, but the entire solar system. Every moon and asteroid might hide weapons or soldiers. Every piece of space debris might be an improvised bomb waiting to explode near passing vessels. The humans had turned their home system into a maze of death that channeled their enemies toward predetermined killing zones. By the time the hegemony fleet reached Earth orbit, they had lost over half their ships and most of their confidence. The survivors faced orbital platforms that bristled with weapons salvaged from destroyed enemy vessels and powered by the massive industrial capacity of human civilization. The final phase of the battle lasted 3 days. Human defenders fought, with the same desperate intensity that Zefkari had observed throughout the war. But now they were fighting for their homes, their families, and their species' right to exist. Every defensive position had to be taken multiple times as humans counterattacked again and again, using whatever weapons they could find. When human ships were destroyed, their crews often continued fighting from escape pods and maintenance shuttles. When orbital platforms were captured, human soldiers fought room by room and corridor by corridor until the entire structure was destroyed. When ammunition ran out, humans used tools, furniture, and their bare hands to continue resisting. The most shocking moment came when a group of human civilian ships, loaded with families fleeing the battle zone, turned around to attack a hegemony cruiser that was threatening a damaged human warship. The civilians knew they would die, but they chose to sacrifice themselves to save the military vessel and its crew. Zefkari watched in horror as children and elderly humans died in the vacuum of space, but their sacrifice allowed the warship to escape and continue fighting. This was not warfare as civilized species understood it. This was something primal and terrible that came from the deepest parts of human nature. The battle ended when Admiral Cooper, his command station burning and most of his fleet destroyed, broadcast a final message to the surviving hegemony forces. His words were transmitted throughout the galaxy and heard by every civilized species in known space. Cooper told the enemy that Earth's defenses were broken and its fleet was scattered, but that the war was not over. Human colonies throughout the galaxy would continue fighting, and they would never stop hunting the species that had tried to destroy their homeworld. The humans would pay any price, bear any burden, and sacrifice everything to protect their own, because they were not just another civilized species. They were something older and more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever known. The hegemony fleet withdrew from Earth orbit, but they had achieved a victory that felt like defeat. They had captured a burned and devastated planet, but they had also awakened something that could not be put back to sleep. The humans had shown the galaxy what happened when predators were forced to fight for their survival. Zefkari returned to the Galactic Council with his report, but he could never return to his old life. He had witnessed the birth of a new type of warfare that would change the balance of power throughout known space. The peaceful species that dominated galactic civilization would now have to coexist with something that they did not understand and could not control. In his final report, Zefkari wrote that humanity represented both the greatest hope and the greatest threat that the galaxy had ever encountered. They could become valuable allies or terrible enemies, but they could never again be ignored or underestimated. The war had ended, but the age of human dominance in galactic affairs had just begun.